While today's decision does effectively end our legal avenues as a province, it does not end our opposition to this costly and ineffective tax.
Still, the Supreme Court ruling meant a disappointing day for some of Canada's biggest provinces. Will the likes of Ontario and Alberta play along? We'll discuss. Also ahead.
This is not an efficient way of working, nor is it a productive way to serve Canadians.
Ottawa's pandemic preparedness under the microscope. A scathing review by the Auditor General. Just how unprepared was this country? We'll have the details. And
we wanted to place ourselves on that trajectory of, who our ancestors are and who we will become ancestors for.
The world's largest collection of Inuit art gets ready to open its doors and help bridge the past with the future. We'll hear from some of the artists involved. But we begin tonight with a win for the Trudeau government's climate plan. The Supreme Court of Canada ruled today that the federal carbon tax is constitutional. Ottawa has the authority to set a minimum price on carbon emissions across the country. Despite the legal stamp of approval, though, the political battle isn't over just yet. CBC's Olivia Stefanovic has the details.
The issue around whether carbon pricing forms part of Canada's plan with respect to reducing emissions is over.
Long-awaited validation for the cornerstone of the Trudeau government's climate agenda.
I don't want to be overly partisan today, but I will say this. There should be no debate in this country about whether climate change is real.
The legal debate over the federal carbon pricing system is settled, but the political one isn't yet.
Let me be clear. Canada's Conservatives will repeal Mr. Trudeau's carbon tax.
The Conservatives, who voted just days ago against recognizing the existence of climate change, say they can reduce greenhouse gas emissions another way.
But we won't be doing that by making the poorest Canadians pay.
Meanwhile, the provinces who challenged the federal law all the way to Canada's highest court now have to make a choice: adopt their own carbon pricing mechanism or have the federal scheme imposed on them.
When it comes to complying with this decision, we're going to do it in a way that imposes the lowest possible cost on Albertans.
Saskatchewan's premier says his government will now be designing its own carbon pricing system.
The Supreme Court's decision is very unfortunate today, but it is a reality that we must deal with.
Canada's Environment Minister says he will be reaching out to the provinces to try to find a way to work together after spending the last 3 years as opponents battling in court. Olivia Stefanovic, CBC News, Ottawa.
And we're joined now by Gary Maher. He's the president and CEO of the Canada West Foundation, a public policy think tank that focuses on Western Canada. He's also the former president and CEO of the Petroleum Services Association of Canada, and we've reached him in Calgary tonight. Hi, Gary. Thanks for being with us.
Good evening. It's nice to be with you.
So, some see this as good news in the fight against climate change, but tell me, in your eyes, do you believe is this the right approach?
Well, I don't think that the Supreme Court of Canada decision creates a winner or a loser in all of this. We still have to deal with the core issue of how does Canada come up with a credible, sensible plan to reducing GHG emissions that go into the atmosphere. And that issue is not what was at stake in the Supreme Court of Canada decision. But what the decision does signal, in my view, is a very strong need, in the words of Minister Wilkinson himself, to be collaborative with the provinces and territories so that we can move forward on a plan that satisfies the needs of the different nature of energy all across this country. So unless you've got that kind of collaboration going on, you're going to continue to have other efforts perhaps to challenge the legislation in other ways on different bases, or having other ways of provinces trying to opt out of what it is that the federal government's trying to do. I want to remind people that in 2016, the Vancouver Declaration was signed. All provinces and the federal government agreed that we need to have a credible plan to reducing GHG emissions. And I think that it's notable that all the provinces will have a different strategy on how to deal with it. In a province like Quebec, all of the electricity is produced by hydroelectricity, but that's not the case in places like Nova Scotia or Alberta or Saskatchewan. And so It's important that we work collaboratively to find something that works for everybody. Everybody's got to put a little bit of water in their wine and be prepared to compromise in order to have something that works for everyone. And if you don't, that's what results in non-durable public policy, where the next government, if it comes in, it may just repeal the legislation completely. That doesn't give us a long-term ability to have a durable public policy that people can rely on, not for the next change of government, but for decades to come.
Right. So how do you see this playing out? As we already heard there, some of the premiers, the fight isn't exactly over. They've got a differing view as to how they want to approach this. So let's talk about, in terms of a timeline, how long do you expect these negotiations between the provinces to go through? And we heard also Saskatchewan is looking at a model like in New Brunswick, where they would essentially roll back some other taxes, but still bring in the carbon tax, essentially offset the cost. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that it's fine because there may be completely different strategies that all accomplish the same goal, which is to reducing, CO2 that vents into the atmosphere. So that there may be different ways of approaching it, I think makes sense. If you look in Saskatchewan, for example, carbon capture and storage, the province of Saskatchewan has invested $1 billion into this project, and it is measurably reducing the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. In the province of Alberta, you've got a carbon trunk line that is another $1 billion project that is reducing the amount of CO2 that goes into the atmosphere. I think that these are credible projects that can go forward. They should be recognized and being given credit by federal government if the federal government shares the view that there are many different ways of accomplishing the policy objective of reducing GHGs.
Okay, the big question for Canadians, how much is this going to cost them and how soon? Can you give us any insights into that?
It's very speculative to say at this point because those kinds of negotiations, the kind of horse trading that may go on between the provinces and the federal government hasn't occurred yet. So it's really hard to speculate how much it would cost you to, fill up for a tank of fuel at the gas station, or when it takes place. So I guess if I were the federal government, I'd say stay tuned and let's see how far we can get along with this idea that that federalism has to be cooperative in order for it to work in this country.
And one of the big questions, and you touched on this, is the question of jobs and impacting industry, particularly in the West. We heard O'Toole last week talking about repealing this if he's elected, and saying even though he does believe climate change is real, though his party did not bring that policy forward, he wants to see lower emitters without losing jobs. Is that possible? Are there alternatives? Are these things mutually exclusive?
They must be kept in balance. I think that it's important to note that you cannot develop any kind of economic activity without access to affordable, reliable energy. And you can't develop any kind of energy without having some impact on the environment. And that includes wind and solar. And if you think about battery technology as an example, the rare earths that are required for batteries to run EVs have an enormous environmental impact. So trying to find the sweet spot, if we're thinking about a Venn diagram, the overlap of economic development, energy, and environment has to be brought in balance. And you've got to find out where those three areas of public policy overlap. If you focus only on one, you will get the wrong outcome.
All right, Gary Maher in Calgary, thanks for taking the time to chat with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.